Dear Christian, is Jesus concerned by the words that we use each day? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that we're not to forswear ourselves. We're not to take our oaths lightly, but we are to perform unto the Lord our oaths. Our words, therefore, need to be truthful, even when we're making promises as we stand before God. And what was happening is that they were really profaning the name of their God and not fulfilling their promises. Leviticus 19 and verse 12, the people were told that they were to fulfill their oaths and they were not to forswear falsely, because what they were doing was profaning the name of thy God. They were not to take the Lord's name in vain. If they did that, Exodus 20 and verse 7, God would not hold them guiltless. So what Jews were doing in Jesus' day is that they will substitute. We don't want to use God's name in our promises, but let's substitute a very important name. Let's say, I will swear by heaven, or I will swear by the earth, or I will swear by Jerusalem. Jesus addressed this in verses 34 and 35 when he said, swear not at all, neither by heaven. Why? For it is the throne of God. By earth, it's the footstool of his feet. By Jerusalem, it's the city of the great king. But in verse 37, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. And what is more than this is of the evil one. What Jesus is introducing to us is really the nature of profanity. It's using God's name when we're really not going to complete our promise, which we are solemnly swearing before God and to man. His name doesn't have that heavy and important meaning when we say those words. So they didn't want to do that. They used a substitute. That they felt like, well, I might not necessarily have to fulfill this promise because I did not put God's name there, and therefore I don't have to keep it, so I have not profaned his name. Profanity is using God's name in a flippant way, not feeling the weight or the person that we are indeed before, and we're swearing by his name. And that's what the Jews were doing. Jesus does care about our words. He's concerned about our words, even when we're making our promises. When we unlock the teaching of the New Testament and we examine the epistles of Paul, we find that our speech is very important. As children of God, it's not befitting for us to have filthy speech or to speak silly things, foolish talk, or jesting, which involves turning a phrase in a way that its meaning might not be one that's befitting or holy. And we see that in Ephesians 5 in verse 4. As Paul says in Colossians 4 and verse 6, our speech should always be with grace, seasoned with salt. It's uplifting. It's holy. It's a benefit to others. It's not corrupting. So we see that God cares about what we say and our words that we use in communicating our ideas to others as a Christian. We know what filthy talk is, I think, in our society. Our society is coarse, and we get an ear of that a lot of times in our life. So identifying filthy speech, you make a list, I'll make a list, and just compare the list, and I think we'd probably have the same words that we understand that would be filthy. I also believe that if we were going to a public place where maybe our children would be, and we saw a sign there at the beginning, at the entrance of that place, no profanity, I feel confident that you and I would know which words we're not to use that day. So we understand those things, but as a Christian, what some Christians have done is that, well, I won't use the name of God. I won't use profanity and put God's name with maybe another derisive term that is very harsh and expresses the fact of this is what I think about the situation. when I'm surprised or when I'm hurt by such a big calamity that happens in my life. But a lot of times we'll use euphemisms. Euphemisms are words or phrases that are not as harsh, they're not as blunt as the word that it might substitute for. For example, if you're an employer and you have to fire an employee, you probably would not say, you're fired. Some would, but you might not want to do that. You said, we're going to have to let you go. We use a less harsh phrase or term, but we've still meant the same thing. They're losing their job. Whether you say they're fired, and that's kind of blunt, or we're letting you go, less harsh. That's a euphemism. That's a substitution. And that's what people have done for God. Oh, we're not going to use God. I don't want to be guilty of profanity, but I might use the word gosh. That's less offensive. But is it any different? It's God-related. Is it used in an empty way? A lot of times it is. It just comes out of people's mouth. But say you feel good about it because I did not use God's name in a flippant way. I just used a substitute. Or are we any different than the Jews who said, I won't use God's name, I'll just use heaven? Jesus didn't see the difference. And we need to make sure our words are not used in a flippant or empty way, even when we use a substitute for God. But today, we text a lot. We communicate to our friends by texting, and one of the popular words, really, there are 3 letters. O.M.G. What does that mean? Some may be writing that as a person that doesn't really care about the name of God, and they just mean, oh my God. Others said, no, I'm using oh my gosh. Gosh, God, it's got a G in it, and all we're using is 3 letters. And someone said, I didn't write a word. I just used shorthand euphemism. That's all you've done. You've substituted something, O.M.G., that is really stating a phrase, and when a person reads that, they're going to fill in the blanks. And it's a lot of times used in a flippant way that says, I'm surprised, I'm astonished, O.M.G., O.M.G., O.M.G. But what we've done is really done the same thing that Jesus condemned the Jews for. Euphemisms. They're God-related, even though you're saying they're substituted for God. It involves conveying the same empty, profane way of using that. So when we think about using that, and Christian, if you're tempted to do that, how could you break yourself from that? I would think the next time I am tempted to write O.M.G., and I see it on the page, I need to remind myself, one mad God. O.M.G. Because he doesn't want us to use his name in a profane way. And maybe I need to find a substitute. Why not write the 3 letters W-O-W? I've just spelled a word of surprise without profaning the name of God. Please consider this. Thank you for watching and listening.